Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to be discussing Christian media's support for Andy Stanley despite his repeated affirmations of homosexuality. And we're going to be shining a light on Ed Stetzer and exposing this cockroach, this grifter in the church. Ed Stetzer is someone who epitomizes failing upwards. He has never planted a successful church, yet has been a trusted go-to research guru for church planting and church growth. He has made a living off of things that he has no experience doing, and he has run everything that he's been a part of to the left and or into the ground. Ed Stetzer is a bad guy, and he's a bad guy doing bad things, but is someone who is propped up and continues to fail upward in the evangelical world. And it's an embarrassment, frankly, but so is the continued existence of Andy Stanley, because he should have been taken care of a decade ago when he preached a sermon affirming homosexuality in 2012. So, we're going to talk about this story. It's a follow-up on Ed Stetzer's defense, and we're also going to put Ed Stetzer on blast for his support of homosexuality as well. So, we're going to get into that, but first, I want to let you know, Evangelical Dark Web is a Christian news gathering and commentary ministry. You can support us over at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. We don't have the big money that, Church Leaders has, or the Christian Post has, or Christianity or Compromise Today has, so we rely on you, the audience. So you can support us over at our Patreon-like system at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join, but the least you can do is like this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, or podcast if you're a listener. Those things really help with the magical algorithms. So let's dive into this story. So, Ed Stetzer tweeted this on Sunday, October 1st. Pastor and author Andy Stanley addressed swirling speculation about his stance on gay marriage during a service that was not live streamed. So he tweets out an article that his publication Church Leaders wrote. So Church Leaders is Ed Stetzer. They are relatively large. He's also dean of the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University, a liberal evangelical college. And he's also part of Outreach Magazine, which I believe Church Leaders falls under Outreach Magazine. So Ed Stetzer tweeted out this support of Andy Stanley. And the article is titled, Andy Stanley Affirms Traditional View of Marriage Following the Controversial Unconditional Conference. Now, let's talk about why this is fake news coming from Ed Stetzer. So, Ed Stetzer's going fake news here because Andy Stanley did not affirm biblical marriage. He merely acknowledged that in the Bible, marriage is between a man and a woman. That is a biblical marriage. Now, does that mean that's the only kind of marriage that Andy Stanley recognizes? No, because we saw in that sermon, in that lecture, really, it's not really a sermon, he affirmed multiple gay marriages, so-called marriages, in that lecture, in that speech. So he's already affirming homosexual marriages, which the Bible does not do. So he's not really taking a biblical stance here. He's just saying, in the Bible, marriage was between a man and a woman. Well, what about nowadays? Is marriage still between a man and a woman? And on that, he really has no real answer, because he says not to sexualize a relationship outside of marriage. Well, what is a marriage, Andy Stanley? What is a marriage? Because the arguments that he uses are eerily similar, like I said in the last video, to the argument that, gay rape is condemned in the New Testament. That's the, homosexuality that's considered sinful in the Bible, not monogamous homosexual couples. That's completely fine. That argument from Andy Stanley sounded eerily similar to that. So this headline's fake news. That's not what happened in the sermon. quite the opposite happened in the sermon. He affirmed homosexual attraction, he affirmed homosexual identity, and he affirmed homosexual marriage. Three things that he affirmed that fall under the category of affirming homosexuality. And we're going to ramp up the war against side B theology. Side B is the people that want to say homosexual attraction is okay and homosexual identity is okay, but homosexual sex acts are sinful. So that's side B Christianity, as they like to call it. And it's still affirming of homosexuality because you're affirming the attraction and the identity. That's affirming. You're just not as affirming as you could be, but you are affirming. So this is part one. They also wrote another article which details Andy Stanley's statements against Al Mohler. So Al Mohler, Andy claims that Al Mohler has a version of Christianity. That's the problem. He does do that in the beginning of the sermon. And again, Andy Stanley was running damage control in his sermon. So that was the purpose of the sermon. And let's talk about the damage control that Christian media ran for Andy Stanley earlier this year. This was an article I wrote January 31st, 2023. It's also on YouTube, by the way. Probably came out the same date. And let's just do a highlight of where Christian media stood on this issue. So, Christian Post, Richard Land, the former head of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention, still calls Andy Stanley a believer, tacitly stating he is a brother in Christ. So that's the history of Andy Stanley with Christian Post. So they defend him as well. They don't call him a false teacher like he obviously is. Like, even the normie pastor knows Andy Stanley's a false teacher. Like, they don't pay attention to the discernment world. They don't pay attention to, what goes on in the Southern Baptist Convention, but they know Andy Stanley's a false teacher. Church leaders reported the issue as a mere Twitter controversy. Reporter Jessica Lee, the producer of the notorious heretic Ed Stetzer's podcast, does no reporting on his actual positions. Ed Stetzer and his online rag are side B, by the way, but that is an article for another day, and that another day has not really come. And let's use this opportunity to really just expose Ed Stetzer. The Gospel Coalition was surprisingly silent on the issue of Andy Stanley back then. They've also had a history of supporting side B theology, which, by the way, Andy Stanley would be on side A, according to them. Moreover, North Point Church is the tied 8th largest church in America. I don't think it's 8th anymore. I think it might have gotten downgraded to 9th. Yet, can it be said that any of the top 10 churches in the United States are orthodox on this issue? I point out at the time that Craig Rochelle is part of the Evangelical Covenant Church, a side B denomination. Brian Tome of Crossroads Church, Ohio, is side B theology all the way, and would even allow homosexuals access to children's ministries. And Joel Osteen is notoriously weak on every issue. Now, Joel Osteen also affirmed the lesbian mayor of Houston at one point in time. So, this type of compromise isn't new. It just doesn't get the attention that it really deserves. So when Ed Stetzer says, oh, this is his stance on gay marriage, or his stance on gay marriage was clarified, it wasn't clarified at all. It was weasel words and lies. Andy Stanley lied multiple times in that sermon, particularly about the coverage of his conference that he hosted, his church hosted. The coverage of that was a lie. It was filled with lies. And the idea that, people say he's not gay affirming, that's a lie. He is definitely gay affirming. He affirmed homosexuality multiple times in that sermon. Multiple times. We already covered that, so we're not going to retread. I do want to show Ed Stetzer's track record of supporting homosexuality. So let's just go through a few articles. We got him promoting Ed Preston Sprinkle. Jesus left the 99 to pursue the one, and that means trans people. Now, again, the leaving of the 99 to pursue the one is not about unbeliever. It's not about converting people, actually. That text is actually about backslidden believers. That's not, and you know that because it's from the lost coin and the lost, and the prodigal son. They all, have the same type of meaning. Jesus repeats the same story 3 times in 3 different ways, or 3 different stories to convey the same message. Might be the more accurate way to put it, but that is about backslidden Christians, not about unbelievers becoming believers. So, classic misinterpretation. Preston Sprinkle is one of the most renowned Side B theologians. He has a center for, was it sexuality and gender, uh, which is a Side B organization. He has spoken at Revoice. Speaking of Revoice, we're also going to talk. He's also promoted Ed Shaw, how God has used same-sex attraction to equip me as a pastor. That's Ed Shaw talking. And again, that was based on a podcast of Ed Stetzer's. So that was based on Ed Stetzer's podcast. Then we can also talk about Gregory Coles, another Revoice alum. It's possible to be same-sex attracted and fully surrendered to Jesus. No, you're keeping your pet sin. You're not fully surrendered if you're not repenting of your pet sin. So Gregory Coles, another Revoice speaker, big proponent of Side B theology, which is heresy. So let's look at the other articles and podcasts that Ed Stetzer has done on this issue. We can talk about Julie Slattery. I don't know who that is, to be honest, but Mark Yarhouse. Now that's an evil guy there. Mark Yarhouse, I call him the mad scientist of Big Eva, the mad gender scientist of Big Eva. Mark Yarhouse is Side B theology. He does not have a biblical view on this issue. He was used by the Gospel Coalition to further Side B theology in the church, and specifically to teach college students how to be gay affirming in a Side B sort of way. So that's Mark Yarhouse. He does not have biblical orthodox views on this issue at all, and he's perhaps one of the most sinister influencers of this issue behind the scene. I believe he's also spoken at Revoice 2019 as well. Sean McDowell, he's also someone who's not very clear on this issue. I would say Sean McDowell's also Side B theology on this issue, and I believe we've covered that in the past. Rachel Gilson, whoa, that's really bad. She's the person that says, preferred pronouns is a hard issue, and she's very much one of the most corrupting influences from the organization Crew. She was very instrumental in subverting that organization. I don't know who Caleb Kaltenbach is, and I don't know who Lawrence Q is. But this is the resources, and these are the ways in which they discuss these topics with, Ed Stetzer's all about promoting heretics on this issue, on the issue that they are heretical about. So that's Ed Stetzer. That's where he stands on this issue. Yet he is the Jezebel that has been tolerated by Big Eva for a long time and continues to be tolerated by Big Eva, no matter how much heresy he defends, how much he publishes it, how much he is, fails at organizations and has no real record of accomplishments on the things that he's trusted with the most, like church growth. This is Ed Stetzer we're talking about. So the epitome of failing upwards. So that's all I wanted to say about that. We'll definitely follow up if more Christian media organizations. Christianity Today has also defended Andy Stanley's statements on this, by the way. They apparently had a reporter there. Apparently, I think that's what they had, a reporter there. So Andy Stanley wanted this news to get out, but he did not want it to get out the way that it did get out. And thank God someone secretly recorded it and gave it to the Protestia. So have a blessed day. We will catch you on the next one.